Welcome to Lee Domingue's podcast, where he shares stories and teaches principles behind why and how your legacy starts today.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Legacy Starts Today podcast, where we're passionate about living with purpose and where our legacy starts today. I'm Lee Domingue, and I have the honor of hosting this episode with a great friend of mine. You guys are going to love him, not only because I love him, but because he has just tremendous wisdom, insight. He is one of the single most intentional guys. He's one of the most intentional dads, husbands, and pastors that I know. And I know he's going to be a delight. It's my great friend from South Florida, Steve Alessi. And Steve was called into ministry a long time ago. I mean, he's been in ministry for over 30 years. And I think you were about 19 years old when you answered the call to ministry and have this heritage of your dad was in ministry and, you know, graduated from Southeastern. Come on, back in the 80s.
Yep.
When they had big hair.
And didn't care.
That's right. And then you served alongside, I think, your parents for many years, and then founded what is Metro Life in Doral, Florida. And you guys have other locations, but both with your amazing wife, Mary. And Mary's a gift, very gifted in a lot of areas, one being in worship. But what's so amazing to me is you've got, and brother, I don't know if a lot of people have this gift of faith, but you've got all four of your kids fully engaged in church ministry, and then also your two in-laws as well, right?
Yep.
And
not just engaged. How about employed?
Yeah, that makes a difference, right?
Big difference, yes.
No, it's so good. Well, I'm just so honored to have you, my brother, and I love what you're doing with the family business podcast with the Alessis, and I love how I've watched you over the years, and I love how your heart for family, it starts right at home. You're not preaching something that's just a great teaching, you're living it. And now more than ever, we need great models and mentors in the family area and the family business. I like that. That's Italian, brother. I'm just telling you that right now. And but I love that about you and how you're really focused on building a strong family for generations. So welcome, my friend.
Well, I get to call you Lee today, and I so appreciate the friendship that we have had from afar, and you have just come in with Kingdom Builders and have been a blessing to my life personally. And you know, a man is known by the friends that he keeps. And I look at you and I see a guy that I just respect, just what you've done with your whole life and the people that you're influencing. So I appreciate that about you, and I respect you. I really do, and hold you in high esteem. But Kingdom Builders has been a tremendous blessing to our church here, Metro Life Church in Miami. And the people, you know, the whole thing about your people, trying to help them find value in what they're doing with their life resources and calling. You've helped us tremendously tag some of these wonderful people that really need to find their purpose, their calling in the local church. And Kingdom Builders has been a tremendous help to do that with us. It's the whole thing. If you build it, they will come. And as much as I've always had a mindset towards legacy, when I heard you, this goes back to Washington, D.C. years ago, when we were up there at an event.
Yeah.
And I heard you speak, and the things you were saying, I'm saying to myself, I hope I can meet this guy. And it was a room full of people, because I just so connected and related to what you were doing. There was such a similar DNA. And I didn't even run in your circles. You didn't run in my circles. Yeah. It was like we had one mutual friend, the Jones brothers.
Yes.
I think from Houston, Texas. But it was such a great welcome. You received me. You started. It was a beautiful relationship that we were able to establish. And you came down and you've really blessed what is our church. And I say this, and I mean it, because yes, it's my church. It's a church, but it's my life's calling, Lee.
Yeah. Wow.
And you have helped me build my life's calling. Coming in and helping us set such a strong foundation. So thanks for blessing the church, but more than that, thanks for blessing and pouring in and helping me build what I've given my life to for these last, right here with this church, Metro Life Church, that my wife and I founded 26 years ago. So thanks for helping us do that.
Wow. No, thank you. You're too kind, and what a blessing it is to be doing what God's created you to do. And thank you for modeling that so well. And thank you for loving your people to help them. Really, honestly, it's about helping them connect to the purpose of what God's created them to do. And for some reason, business people kind of get left out many times and they don't know their place. And so thank you for being so faithful. And I've enjoyed every minute, brother, and we just getting started and we get to do it together. And you guys are just fresh air. And so love you a ton.
Feel it.
Let's dive into a couple things. I want to, for our listeners, I want to tap in a little bit to family and ministry, and I want you to explain kind of how that's evolved. I want you to explain and share with everyone the family business with the Alessis as well. And then I've got some leadership questions I'd love for you to answer. And then I want to dive into a great resource that not only you wrote, but you've lived. It's one thing to write something. It's a whole entire other thing and to live it. And this is a very personal journey that you went through where, brother, you flatlined and you were gone. And God chose you to bring you back because he ain't done with you yet. And it's your book, 42. And it's a guide to finishing well when you're almost finished. And, and so I want to unpack those things. And then I always end with asking my guests, what do you want your legacy to be? And that's a great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Gotcha.
So let's dive in. Working with your family it can be beautiful, it can be taxing, it can be expensive, especially when you're employing them all.
Yeah.
But it can be tricky. And there can be some tensions, there can be some ebbs and flows. And, explain to me, you guys have been successful, no perfection, but successful I've met your kids. And you've been successful in raising 4 kids and building the church ground up. Give us a little bit of the kind of how that's evolved, some of the good, the bad, and even the miraculous.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I'm blessed. My wife and I, Mary Alessi, her twin sister is Martha Menizzi. So some of your listeners may know Martha from her gospel years, and she and her husband, Danny, have a great church in Orlando, Epic Life. But Mary and I been married, goodness, man, we're going on 36 years.
That's amazing.
And the Lord's blessed us with 4 kids that are now adults. And we serve in the ministry now together. We work together. Literally every day we see one another. And we have been fortunate because Mary was raised in ministry. I was raised in ministry. Mary was an evangelist kid. Her dad wrote many songs that were sung in some of our hymn books, Learning to Lean, Touching Jesus, Love Grew Where the Blood Fell. So Mary came to the scene as an evangelist's daughter. And her mom was working for my dad, who my dad pastored and started a church here, Grace Church of Kindle, almost 60 years ago. And so she was working with my dad and brought her daughter in, and I fell for Mary right there. So it wasn't long before the 2 of us got married. We had a hard time on the front end, Lee, having kids. Yeah. Probably took us 4 years to do so, went through fertility and infertility and the clinics and all the medication that was needed, which then when we finally had our first son, Christopher, in 91, I guess we so appreciated having a child that right away I'd see that kid and he looked so much like me that there was just, I knew this boy, he was going to just have to get in step with me every aspect and season of his life. Yeah. And then a couple of years after that, we were able to have Stephanie. Stephanie came on the scene and she was another struggle. We believed God for a healing again in Mary's body. And miraculously, Stephanie was born. Then out of nowhere, we hear that when we started our church here in Doral, Mary thought she had the flu, only to find out that it was Lolo. Our daughter, Lauren, was born right about 6 months after we started our church. And then a complete surprise, was our daughter, Gabby. And Gabby is everything that name is. She can talk good, all of it, keeps us all entertained. She's right in the middle. So we've had these 4 kids that when we started our church has just been there every step of the way with us. And we've loved it. Now, I can't tell you from the get-go that Mary and I were thinking of them, that one day they would be with us in ministry serving.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily have that. But what we did have in mind was that they would love God. And if they loved God, it was somehow in our ability to put them in the environment where that Levitical priesthood would be recognized in their life. And thankfully, all 4 of them are involved today. Stephanie, my daughter, and my son, Christopher, both got married. Christopher married Rochelle, precious girl. She's right alongside. She handles all of our worship ministry, advertising, and promotion and marketing. She works right alongside Mary and Stephanie in that. And Stephanie married a great guy. Of all things, his name is Chris. So I got 2 Chris, and Chris Muina comes on board, and he's all things education for us. He's been a teacher. He's got his master's over here at the University of Miami. And so he's all things education. All of them have just fell into their roles of ministry. Christopher is my pretty much go-to right-hand man. He's the campus pastor here in Doral, and he's learning all things admin. He's a tremendous communicator, so we know the future's set with him. Stephanie goes right in line with worship, works right alongside of her mom. It's beautiful. She's writing songs.
Wow.
She's got some great projects out there. Lauren, and that's a great story about a child who, if you're in ministry and you're trying to find a place for all of your kids, you can't just think they're all going to be platform people, because Lauren brings to the table a counseling anointing. And
Wow.
she's got her master's over at Liberty that she's just finished up. She comes to that, brings counseling, mental health to the ministry. And then our daughter, Gabby, right now is leading our youth group, and she's a tremendous administrator. She's got great corporate leadership skills. She was able to get her education here at FIU in corporate management, and so she's doing a great job there. And she's a wonderful communicator, really strong in leadership, which is where she and I connect. So yes, we've got 8 of us all serving together, along with about another 15 on our staff. And thankfully, they get along with everybody on the team. And mom and dad, Mary and I don't have to be in the middle of making that happen. They know they have to work in sync with the people that for all these years helped Mary and I build this church.
That's so good. You know what I love about you, brother, and I don't want our listeners to miss this. You just unpacked. This is the difference. This is Steve Alessi versus the majority of people. When you unpack your family, you didn't say, "Oh, I have 4 kids and a couple of in-laws." You said them by name. You recognized them. You affirmed them, and it was just natural. That is so important, because many times, and I know many times in whether you're a business owner or you're a pastor of a church and everything, it's so many times our kids are looking at it going, "Okay, man, my dad does that," but that's really the priority, is that business or the church over the kids. And the way that you recognize your kids is just natural, and it's just in you. That's a lesson learned right there. And if we could take the moment to really understand and pour into our kids, but I have a question for you. How do you remain, because this has been built by intentional living, no doubt, a lot of grace, prayer, but how do you stay influential in your young adult children's lives? How do you maintain that and keep them connected to the family vision?
Yeah. I'll tell you, there's the little phrase. I remember a buddy of mine telling me, he says, in most cases when he's dealing with a situation, he would say on a regular basis, if it didn't work out right, or he was giving it too much attention and sacrificing too much, and he wasn't getting the results he wanted, he'd always say that the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I'll tell you, I had to find something in my life with the ministry here, Lee, that if I'm going to put my intention and my focus anywhere, and I'm going to be squeezed and make something happen, I got to make sure the people that are closest to me, my kids, are getting as much, if not more, attention than some of the other people of influence in my church.
Wow.
I know. When we have to build our ministries, we have to work with staff. We have to. We know leadership is not going to be just one person doing all the work and seeing all the influence spread across. We need teams. And I know as a pastor, we work hard over the years to pour leadership into our staff. We've got to. And I'm sitting there saying, as time's going on, I'm looking at my kids and, they're not perfect. They're like their dad. They're very imperfect. I wish they were more like their mom, a little bit more perfected. But I'm looking at them and I'm like, why don't I put the investment in them as much, if not more?
Yeah.
And so I have to go that extra mile. I have to be willing to say, I'm sorry. Some people want to say, well, look, all the ministry, the job stops at the office. That's it. Don't bring it home to you, to your family and to your kids. I thought that's really unrealistic in what I do, because my ministry as a pastor isn't just what I'm doing in my office. My ministry is what I'm doing when nobody's watching. I'm having to be a godly man when I'm at home and I'm not feeling my best and I lose my temper and I'm out of sorts and I'm struggling with the financial pressure and I'm wondering how I'm going to pay the bills, and I'm asking the wife how much more are you going to spend, how many more times you got to go to the mall. What I'm in the middle of all that. I got to realize, wait, I'm a Christian first, and I'm a minister there first, because I got to minister my life. I got to lead me. So if I'm doing that, I'm looking at my kids and I'm telling them, guys, this is something we do 24/7. It's what we've been called to. And if we're called to it, then I'm sorry, we don't get the benefit of checking out after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. To whom much is given, much is required. And in that environment, Lee, I can't say it's perfect, but for us, it's just kind of worked, because ministry for us has never been work. Yeah. I got to be honest. We love what we do, and I want to cry over here, because we are given the opportunity every day to lead people that God really loves. I mean, He really loves them. And He looks at us and He says, all right, man, I'm going to use you to help lead my people. You're going to be a mouthpiece. Wow. You're going to be an example. So come on, step up. Let's go to work. Let's bless these people. And having the privilege to be able to do that gives us this feeling about ministry that, quite frankly, it's just not work. If we believe Jesus, the burden is light, my yoke is easy. This is a blessing. So when I'm pouring into my kids, I'm letting them know that we are privileged to be able to stand before God's people and bless them. And yes, there's a lot of cultural challenges, and in our church, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry, but we try to hit those cultural issues, and we try to address what's going on in society today, and we stand up for biblical values. But at the same time, I got to remind us, our family, all the time, remember, those people go home on Monday. They got to go home after a Sunday service, and they got to get ready for Monday. And what they're dealing with on Monday is how to get those kids ready for school, how to get them through that test, how to deal with their employees that they're going to deal with when they go on the job, how to go ahead and make that business deal happen and bring those finances home to pay their bills. We've got to make sure our people are blessed, because we're blessed, we're privileged with the opportunity to really pour into their lives. So in our family, we know this. We do this. It's an honor. It's a privilege. We're not going to hurt God's people. We're going to take care of God's people. And as a family, who better to want to do that with. So I'm training them every step of the way, even though they're in their 30s right now and late 20s. I'm training them every step of the way. This is a privilege, man. And we're going to do this together, along with the wonderful staff that the Lord has blessed us with. It's just this church.
So good. So good. I remember, Laura and I, we've been married for not 36, but you got us by 2, with 34 years and kids, grandkids, and all of that. And I look back on my life, and not only in the successes, but in the setbacks, you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
And, I heard John Maxwell say this, where he talks about a return on failure, not a return on investment. That's how we think as business, but return on failure. And the value of failure is learning. And the value of learning is improvement. And I look back on my life and I see different moments where I learned in some of the most challenging times stuff that I couldn't have learned anywhere else. Is there any area in, where that you guys have navigated, whether it's in church, ministry, family life, where you're sitting there going, you know what? There was a return on failure in this area. Like, this was something that taught us. I tell people this way, Steve. I say, I don't have any wounds. I used to have wounds. I don't have any wounds. They're scars. And my scars have wisdom. Yeah. Because if you keep your heart right, God can teach us so much in through, it's my first business ever had, failed, but what I learned in that business helped prepare me for a very successful second business that's still succeeding today. But there was a return in that. No classroom could teach me that. It was a journey that I had to go through. And I'm wondering, as you guys, you're managing all these different things, you're so intentional, but there's ever been any area where that's a return. That's a return on failure.
Yeah. I think a book stands out in my mind that I read years ago when I was younger. It was by Fred Price, and it was called Faith, Foolishness, or Presumption. And as a leader, I've always had that mindset of, okay, is this going to be faith, or is this going to be foolishness, or is this just presumption? And I had to, as I've navigated through life, I've had to deal with, as you know, in ministry, certain leadership decisions along the way. And it's great to be in faith. It really is, because you want to be in faith, but we can't always be telling and charging our people to, let's go out and take this mountain, if it's a mountain that right now we shouldn't be taking.
Yeah.
So we could declare
that's
that
wisdom.
We have faith. Let's go get it. Let's go get it. Let's go get it. But maybe right now is not the time for that. When do we get to a place where we start to operate in wisdom and let those principles of wisdom start to be adhered to every day? And that wisdom is going to produce blessings and prosperity in our life and peace in our life. So early on, I remember when we started our church, I had this thing in my heart for my wife and I, for young women that had pregnancy out of wedlock. And I connected with Mercy Ministries of America, Nancy Alcorn, great woman in the Nashville area. And I said, all right, Nancy, we went up to see her place, and I said to her, listen, we're going to buy a facility in South Florida. Our church was 2 years old. Okay. Wow. Didn't have money at that point to have a church of its own. We were leasing, but I'm over here saying, we're going to buy a facility and we're going to have a girls' home. Well, we stepped into a facility, long story short, 5 acres. It was beautiful, place of peace. I could not get that thing funded. I thought I could go to the corporations in the area, because Doral, at the time when we were here, we were the first church in Doral 26 years ago. I thought for sure some of the corporations would jump on board with us and support us. Not a dime. Finally had to get to a place where I went to somebody that was ahead at that time of Jeb Bush, who was the governor of Florida. He put out a educational component of his leadership that dealt with early childhood education. So I went and I talked to that man and I said, listen, I need to find out how to get this home funded. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, there's been a shift in the way funds are going to help facilities like this. They're going to early education, not to the maintenance of the problem. And he more or less looked at me and he said, close it down. Well, listen, I was so in faith, and I got my family behind this, Lee. I got my family, church family behind it, and they're like, yes, we're going to build this home. We're going to get girls in it. Well, at that point, we had 3 young ladies that were pregnant and had their babies out of wedlock. We were there with them, and we only had one strike policy. Most of them were 3 strikes. If they get in an argument, they fight, they cuss, whatever, we'll deal with it. But one was when they go to school, they cannot leave that school because they would put their child in the nursery. Well, young girl, we set her up for college, but she committed the cardinal sin. She ended up her last year of high school, skipped class for the day, but left her kid over in the nursery, and we were responsible for that. So we ended up having our heart broken. We were so deep in debt, over $500,000 in debt. I had a line of credit to pay for everything going on. And I just had to realize at that point, Steve, that wasn't faith that you were operating in. That was foolishness.
Wow.
And I ended up making a difficult decision. I felt like a failure, and I closed that thing down. We ended up at that point, we paid after selling the facility. We still had a mortgage of about $70,000. It was with a local bank. I could have run from that local bank and said, hey, man, we more or less filed for bankruptcy with this organization, this nonprofit, whatever that looks like. But I didn't. I honored my commitment to them. Took us 5 years at that point to pay off that $70,000. One of the best lessons I ever learned was when I had to experience that failure.
Wow.
It humiliated me.
Yeah.
I thought for sure people would jump on board financially. Our church was willing to jump right on board along the way with us and supported every step of the way. And it just didn't happen. And to have to get up and say, folks, we got to sell the home, close it, move on. I felt like that was my biggest failure as a leader. But my gosh, that failure has saved me so many headaches over the 20 some odd years since. So yes, we fail as we know our way into success, and it's okay, because I think God looks at us through the lens of wisdom. And if I can learn from that, I'm going to be a better leader.
I think that's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, right? And
there you go.
And God doesn't waste anything. And I think about the story of Jacob and Esau. And when Jacob was a handful, man. Jacob was they called him a supplanter, a trickster, all these things. But when you look at Jacob's life, Jacob had this, he was a grasper of more. And I think even though he didn't have character and God developed him over a period of time, and he went through some tough times, and he made some poor choices, and he did this and he did that, yet Jacob, I think God rather work with a moving target or steering a moving target than have to convince somebody it's worth it, like he did with Esau.
Yeah.
And Esau just, and so I think even in our mistakes, even in, as you were saying, I was embarrassed to do that, but I honored it and walked through it. That teaches us something. I've gone through situations like that, and it teaches us a discipline and a something. Just because God's principles are working in one area, if he doesn't give us ground in that other area, we better not go in that area. And so it's, for me, those lessons, and sometimes they're expensive, but I always felt if I kept my heart right, that God could work with that. And he has, because they teach us things that we couldn't learn any other way. Well, I'll tell you
if I could. Oh, are you kidding me? Well, one of the things that ultimately did that heart of my wife and I and our leadership of a church to still pour into young girls that are victims of some of their bad choices in life, and even from some of the things that society's putting on them. That's still alive in us, which was one of the reasons why when I learned that you have the ministry that you have to help young sex traffic victims, we wanted to jump right on board with that. And that was such a better place for us as a church. We don't have to go out and reinvent this wheel. We don't have to go out and grab hold of something that's not within maybe what our ultimate calling is. We're to build churches, but we're to partner with people like yourselves that are having such an impact in those areas.
So good, so good. Let's while we have some time, if we can, the next two things I really want to focus on is unpack for our listeners what is the family business with the Alessis, and then I want to get into your book.
Well, as you would know, Sundays are super high. We love it. Emotionally, we're up here. We have a great service. The worship's doing great. When you're in a healthy church, those Sundays are wonderful. They really are. So Mary and I have these wonderful highs. And sometimes on Mondays, we get this, not low, but we get a lull. And what do? We sit there and we talk. We talk about this going on, how we could have done this better, how we could have dealt with this situation, how this family is dealing with it. And so what we found ourselves doing is sitting around talking about these things. And even with our kids, we're sitting there talking about them. And so I'm like, wait a minute. I think some people can benefit from these talks.
Yeah.
So we started this podcast. Now, what was the podcast going to be named? It's the family business. Come on, we're Italians.
I love it.
My kids love the Italian heritage. My wife kind of accepts it. And the Alessi name, man, we celebrate it in all things Italian. It's kind of like the way my dad ran his church back in the day, a little mafiosa. You let your right hand know you don't let your right hand know what your left hand's doing. Keep your friends close. You keep your enemies closer. All of those things was my dad's kind of philosophy back in the day. But we went ahead and said, all right, here's what we're going to call it, the family business. And so what we do is we come together as a family. And Mary and I had a lot of it, but our kids are involved, young adults, and they minister and speak to a different generation than Mary and I do. It's a great balance. So we come around the podcast table in our podcast booth, and we've been doing this for about 5 seasons now, and we're over 200 episodes, and we're about to launch a new one. A whole new set's going to be designed for it, but it's us talking about what we do in family.
Yeah.
And we have a tagline that says, family's everybody's business. And you know what that is. If you don't take care of your business, then everybody else is going to be talking about your business and your family. So we talk about things about our family, how we operate. When my kids got married, we talked about those first couple of months, what it felt like for them and their spouse to not only be married now, but also how they got involved and how we work with one another, actually how they work with me. Most of it's about how they deal with dad and so on. So we talk about things like that. And we do hit some of the cultural issues. We get in there and talk about things like church hurt, man. And how we deal with people that have been hurt in a church environment. And we discuss what our response to that is. So it goes from marriage, it goes from ministry, and it's talking about things that we just don't have time to talk about on Sunday. So that's the family business with the Alessis. You can find it on all of the different podcast platforms, and I hope you guys can dial in and listen to it.
Yeah, listen, if you want to get some wisdom by something that actually, the right way is the one that works, and I can attest that the Alessi family lives what they teach. And so I highly encourage all of our listeners to check out the family business with the Alessis. I thought about this. This is not only an Italian principle, but I believe it's a godly principle, is before you can be in the business, you got to be in the family.
There you go.
Before you can be in the kingdom, you got to be in God's family. So before you can be in the business, you got to be in the family. Come on.
We're writing it down. We're going to use it. We'll give you credit 2 or 3 times.
No. It's yours, brother. You live it. You live it. Well, let's for the remaining time that we have, I'd love for you to share. You've got this great book that you've released several months ago that really is from your own personal journey. But I love how your experience really is, and you've really created a guide for because a lot of people are questioning this right now. Some people want to quit, and I think if we don't quit, we win. But how do you finish well? There's a lot of guys that are in our age groups. There are a lot of guys that are sitting there. They don't know when to hand a baton off, how to do it. Am I done? Do I just quit? Do I go in the back 40 and just lay my head down and just go play golf? Or what do I do? And, from your own personal journey of really a near-death experience. Is but I want you to unpack that for us and share. Tell us about the latest book that you released called 42.
42, Guide to Finishing Well When You Thought You Were Finished. It comes down to the 42 minutes that paramedics worked on me when I had the Widowmaker heart attack back in 2007. It was a Monday after Father's Day weekend. I had fettuccine Alfredo for lunch that day. And when they say fettuccine Alfredo is a heart attack on a plate, they weren't kidding. Because the next day, when we were just moving into our condo, matter of fact, in Stewart, I felt a pain hit my left shoulder. And I knew something was wrong, Lee. And I told Mary, I got to go to the bathroom, went to the restroom, just got rid of everything on the inside of me. And when I stood up, that pain in my shoulder moved to the middle of my chest. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I gave the wrong confession. Because I said, Lord, not now. Don't do this now. When I should have said, Satan, no, not now. Don't do this now.
Yeah.
But I was so taken back. I walked back down and I told Mary, call paramedics. I heard the sirens going off. And next thing you know it, the front door opened up and 5 heroes of mine to this day came walking through the door. I'd already taken off my shirt because I knew this was going to get ugly. I took off my watch and my glasses. They walked up to me and they said, Steve, have you taken any Viagra or anything like that? I said, no. And they gave me a baby aspirin. I put it in my mouth. And next thing you know it, I hit the floor. And for 42 minutes, those men worked on me to keep me alive. They hit me 7 times with the paddles just to keep my heart pumping. They finally got me stabilized, put me in the wagon, took me over to the hospital. And for about 3 days, sat there, couldn't hardly see my family, went through one of the darkest seasons of my life. And when it was over, I dealt with things such as guilt because I couldn't believe I didn't take better care of myself when everything was going on before that. I wasn't sure about what my future was. I couldn't understand why God would allow something like this to happen to me. I'd tried to be a real good husband. I didn't take advantage of my wife. I didn't morally want to step out of bounds at any time along the way. My kids, I was good to them as a father. I was good to my church, didn't touch the 3 G's, the gold, the glory, or the girls. I just was focused on following the plan of God for my life. And all of a sudden I had this heart attack come out of nowhere. And honestly, I couldn't tell you a reason for it other than it's just life. And 42 is about how I dealt with that emotionally, mentally, spiritually, what it caused me to do, how it helped me to rethink some of my values, what was important. It did get me thinking about the future. And I think where you and I have been able to connect on legacy is the direct result of that heart attack, because it caused me to think long game. It caused me to think past tomorrow. Because at one point, for about 3 months or so, or actually 3 years after the heart attack, I could hardly have enough faith for me to get out of my own way because I was dealing with so much fear. What if it happens again? What if it comes out of nowhere and I'm not ready for it? I didn't like being on medication. That was new to me. Blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication. I didn't like being on any of that because I felt it was a sign of weakness. I always thought I was taking care of myself physically. I used to work out quite a bit, and as long as my chest was bigger than my stomach, I felt like I was doing a good job of it. But all this stuff brought me to a place where I was in more or less just kind of, how do I just take care of myself? I hunkered down. The church, after about 3 months, Mary and I came back. We got away. My pastor, Pastor Mike Hayes, was a blessing to help me during that time. And our staff stepped up and handled the ministry for us for 3 months while we just took care of ourselves and recouped. Because this hit Mary as much as it hit me. Because out of nowhere, she was dealing with the fact that maybe she could lose her husband. So once we recouped, we got back on our feet, came back to the church. For about 3 years, we kind of limped. I learned what it was to wrestle with life and walk out with a limp. And I had to be okay with limping, and came out of all of that. And finally, in a service one day, I wasn't speaking, and it was right about 3 years to the date. I put my arm around my wife, Mary, and when I did, I happened to notice there was a wall in the back of our sanctuary. And I thought to myself at that moment, that wall needs to come down. And Lee, I turned back around, and when I looked back at the stage, I heard the Lord say, yeah, it's time to dream again. It's time to get your eyes off of yourself and start seeing what I have planned for you. And that then for the next, 12 years since that experience has allowed me just to rebuild and keep the family close and keep the ministry going strong. It was a few years ago that I was allowed to help my dad and mom retire from ministry. And so we stepped in and have been pastoring that location as well as our location here. Matter of fact, we're in the middle of a almost $4 million reconstruction project there of just beautifying that facility that's in the middle of Dadeland area, very influential and beautiful neighborhood. And we're so blessed to be a part of that. So I was able to help my parents retire out. And my dad, I lost him in 2020 with COVID, but still with mom, but thankful to be able to have her sit there in that church when she's in town and she sees not only her son preach, but she sees her grandson and her granddaughters over there ministering and music and teaching. And so it's a blessing to be able to let her see that. And so all of that 42 was just going through a real dark season of life where I felt like I wasn't sure about my tomorrow. And here, even to a good man, when the Bible says a good man falls 7 times, but then gets back up, hey, it taught me a tremendous lesson. You can be good, but you're still going to fall. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have hurts. But how do you finish well? And every decision you make after that failure, whether it's bankruptcy, whether it's a divorce, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether it's failure in the ministry, every decision you make after that failure is really setting the path for what's going to ultimately be your legacy. And what more than ever I find myself doing at 62 years of age now, Lee, and I try to look at my buddies and tell them the same thing. Guys, we got to finish well.
Yeah.
There's been too many that are out there that in the latter years of their life, they should be enjoying the fruit of their labors, but because of a misstep, I just don't want to be there. And 42 has helped me get it right. So much so that today, Mary and I are seeing not just our kids and what they're doing, but even now our children's children. As we have grandchildren, we have little Gianna Muina. She's precious and loves running around saying, Papa, Papa. And we have our namesake. My son Christopher has a little boy. His name is Marino, named him after Dan Marino. And so we have an Alessi.
Of course.
Yep. So we got 2 right now, and we have a 3rd coming up in December. Our daughter Stephanie will give us another boy, and his name will be Matthew.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
How can our listeners get, where can they get 42? How can they get a copy of that and get that resource?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. They can go ahead and just Google 42, spell out the words, the numbers 42, and Steve Alessi, ALESSI. They can find it right there. They can find it at our church website as well at metrolifechurch.com. And we'll make sure they get that, metrolifechurch.com.
Yeah, we'll make sure, and also to all of our viewers and listeners, we're going to push that information to you. And if you want to connect with Steve, highly, highly recommend 42 is a great resource for, honestly, any age leader inside your church as well. Well, the last question, this has been so rich, brother. Thank you so much it's taken us several months to be able to put this time together, and I'm just so grateful for you. And as I ask any of those that join us on the Legacy Starts Today podcast, I think it's one of the greatest questions that most people can't answer, but it's one we need to learn to answer. And it's simply this: what do you hope your legacy to be?
Well, I'm going to bring it down to what I want to be on my tombstone. I know it sounds morbid, but I want this to be on my tombstone. And it comes down to this: he led by example, not by parking space.
Wow.
More than anything
hang on
about my
one second.
life.
Hang on. He led by example.
Not by parking space.
Not by parking. Wow.
You're so funny. You're over there writing it down. You're making me feel really good today.
No, you got it. No. You got to unpack that a little further. So
Well,
not by parking space.
Not by parking space, which is position. You know,
Wow.
I think it was Deion Sanders who said something the other day. He was talking about what a person's title is and their position. He says, listen, the title, your position is only letting people know where your office is. All right. That's not real leadership. Real leadership is to get there and walk the walk, talk the talk, that you're out there trying to show people or tell people how to do life. No, you got to show people how to do life. And here in my church, yes, people respond, Pastor Steve, and I always say to them, you know, if you get to know me as Steve, you're going to love me as Pastor Steve. Because I want to make sure that I'm living what I'm trying to teach you more than ever. More than anything, it's got to come down to being an example. And so I want it to be said that he led in a way that he walked it out. It's not the blind leading the blind. Right. He knows where we're going. So it starts in my home. It really does start in my relationship with my wife. If I'm a stickler about anything, it's that, man. Yeah. But what Paul tells Timothy, you got to be able to take care of your own family well before you take care of the family of God. I see it with my son. He's 32, and he is wonderful in the ministry alongside of me. He really is. But watching him now as a father, I say to him, Chris, now you're going to learn what it is to shepherd people. Yeah. Now you're going to know what it really is to take care of people, because the way you take care of your son is the way you're going to take care of the people of God. And so I want that to be said more than anything. He said it, but he also did it. He said it, he showed it. He didn't just talk it. It wasn't just about a sermon. Man, Lee, I can tell you from the time we started our church, it might have been, you mentioned John Maxwell, who was really aged well in life, but early on, when I started listening to him, I think he said this, so I'm going to give him credit, all right? But this has been part of another mantra of my life. I always say to our church family, you're not going to judge me by my sermon. You're not going to judge Mary by her singing. You're going to judge us by our family. And if my kids are jacked up, my kids are rebellious, that says something to my leadership in the home. And I do say this to my church family. This is another one of my deals. I said, listen, you can't leave this church because of my management. Now, you can leave because of my morals. If I jack up, if I step off my walk with God and I mess up morally, leave. Don't even sit there and send me a note. Just go, because I violated a trust that you need. That you need to have in me. But don't get mad at me because of the way I manage the ministry here. I don't go to your office and judge the way you're managing your business. Okay, so don't do that. But I give you permission that if I step out of bounds, go ahead and bail. No problem. Which puts pressure on me, brother, to make sure that I'm leading by example. So if anything's going to be said about Alessi, it's going to be that he led by example, not by parking space or title.
So good. So good. Well, I can attest the years that I've known you since we connected it was the Library of Congress in D.C., and we connected that day. You are somebody, brother, that leads by example. You've impacted my life and inspired me to be a better dad and a better husband and a better leader. And so I thank you for your openness, brother, and thank you for really all that you share today, but most is the example in which you lead and Mary leads. It's just so fresh. Don't forget, to all of our listeners, you can, if you want to connect with Steve, you can go to Metro Life Church as well. We're going to make sure you get all those URLs and contact information, and then you can check out 42, his new book, which I highly recommend, at Amazon as well. Brother, thank you so much, and just such a joy that you bring to my life as well. And if you're in South Florida, you need to go to check out Metro Life. Go in, pop in for a service, and go meet Pastor Steve, and as well, I think you'll be really, really inspired and enjoy the time with them. But as always, just want to thank all of our listeners as well for joining us on the Legacy Starts Today podcast. We'll catch you on the next episode. And always remember, your legacy starts today. To learn more, follow us on social media at kingdombuilders.us.
And join us next time for Legacy Starts Today with Lee Domingue.